That was okay. Appreciate him as he takes a seat. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon once again. Are you well? Fantastic. That was so much for an introduction, quite a long one. Should have made it as short as that. That's in a brief summary. I thought he was actually going to read that. But when he went on to read the earlier one, I said, I give him consent. It is legal, right? Allow me in the next few minutes to just take us through a brief presentation that we are titling A Total Quality Life. Why a total quality life? And I'm going to approach this from three perspectives because I have been privileged over the years to sort of like condense this from three perspectives: a philosophical perspective, then a psychological perspective, and a sociological perspective. Why is that important? You will only be in the workplace the totality of who you are as an individual. Would you agree with that? In other words, if you are not good as an individual, if you're not working on being a total quality person, then you become very limited in your ability to deliver value and quality in the workplace. It has been said in sociology, and I'm going to quote a study. Actually, this is the longest study that has been done in the history of the world. It was done by the Harvard Business Institute. And this study is an ongoing study, and they've been studying for the last 80 years. How many years? Is there any, ask your neighbor, how old are you? Or how far are you from 80? So for 80 years, they've been trying to identify what are some of the factors that cause a human being to have a quality life and to be able to live not just a long life, but a fulfilled and a rich life. And this is a study done by a gentleman called Robert Manninger. You can go and check him out online. And this is, it happens to be the research that has produced the highest watched, one of the highest watched TED Talks. Now, why am I saying all this and why is this important? I have realized that for a lot of people, they may have professional mobility, and when you put them in a workplace, they can deliver, they can produce quality. But when you look at the two other aspects that define the quality of their lives, which is not only how are you doing professionally, but how are you doing personally, and how are you doing socially? How are you doing personally, and how are you doing socially? So ask your neighbor, how are you doing personally, and how are you doing socially? And tell them it's good to be honest. You know, we were told earlier, I think when the course was being opened, yeah, that this is the place where we get to talk and interact, yeah? Let me tell you why this is important. Have you realized that we have incidences that are happening in our country that are shocking, where you find somebody that looked like they were a very good person, all of a sudden they go and do something that sends shockwaves around the world. You hear of a policeman perhaps that went, took a gun and decided to blow up his family and to blow himself. And perhaps he was performing well in the workplace, but the question is not how are you doing professionally. The question is if we were to strip you out of your HR role or your representation role, what would we remain with? Are we together so far? So we are talking about how are you doing personally and how are you doing socially, all right? Now, let me say something else before I get to the presentation, and this is what I'm going to say. A lot of people succeed professionally at the expense of their social life, and then when they are done with their professional journey, they actually realize that they don't have a life, because now they have left the workplace where they had relationships at work, but when they go out there, they find that they are lonely, they find that they are isolated, and they begin having a challenge navigating through life, because life is not just professional, life is also social. Now, in fact, would you ask your neighbor, do you have friends outside your office? Or are your friends, when you are in a financial crank, yeah? You know, when you're in a financial corner, do you call your colleagues, or do you have a social capital that you have built that you can get value from? Are we together? Okay, if we are together, say aye. You know, an afternoon presentation is difficult to do because people can say prayers. Our friend told us people can say prayers for you, yeah? So I want us to explore in a brief sense. So then, what does it mean for you to balance your life to be a total quality life on those three stones, right? Professionally, personally, and socially. Allow me to say this before I go on. If for those of you, and I realize, I think when our first presenter was presenting, a lot of us are either millennials going backwards. I think it's only these two Gen Zs that I had that were here, right? And you realize that when we were younger, and when you would go to your parents or your folks down in Ushago, and they would send you to the kitchen, yeah? The kitchen had 3 stones, right? So that the 3 stones can be able to balance whatever it is that you're cooking. Now, if you're going to be able to balance your life and to have a total quality life, not just a life that has riches, but a life that has richness, right? You must be able to balance these 3 things that we are talking about. You must be able to address, how am I doing personally? How is my mental health? And I know somebody's going to talk about that. How is my emotional health? Have you ever realized that you can work so hard? And I don't know whether you have a colleague in the office and you guys are in HR. You have that person in the office that when they come to your office, you know negative energy has entered. Now look at your neighbor and ask them, are you a suspect or a prospect? It is also possible to be the boss where when an employee is told that they are supposed to come to your office, they would rather resign. And woe unto you if you're dealing with Gen Zs. You know, it has been said in studies that have been done on Gen Zs, and I love the presentation on Gen Zs. But can we appreciate that he did a fantastic job, right, on Gen Zs. So they've said the biggest crisis in work is that there are 2 groups of people at work. There are people who are called modern elders and they are future prophets. So the modern elders is you and I that are, hizo generations za kitambo, yeah? And then come this younger generation that say, now we are the future prophets. We know where the world is going. So even if you have a say, you've got to listen to us. Now, if you don't have social capability to manage your relationships, you're going to have a lot of antagonism, not just at work, but in your private life, and that is going to affect how you engage in life. Are we together up to there? If we are together, say aye. Fantastic. So let's talk about what are the things that cause people to have what I call bankruptcy of a quality life. You know, it is possible to build a career that looks like an empire externally, but inside you are a pauper. I don't know whether you've ever seen. Do you remember there was a time, and somebody quoted Baba earlier, there was a time the guys in Kibra were moved from the lower end, and then they built some very nice houses for them on the high end, right? And do you remember what happened after a few months? After a few months, these guys that had gone to these high-end houses that had been built ended up going back to the place that reflects who they are inside. Now, here is what I want you to appreciate as we go on with our conversation. Who you are as an individual will show up long after your career is over. So you better invest in that. Are we together? Hayangalia jirani yako mwambie, who you are on the inside will show up. Long after you are done working with the place you're working for. And then ask them, what are you doing about it? What are you doing about it? Now, allow me to keep some slides so that I can be able to get to some few things that I want us to consider. I have a question for you here, and this is an important question to consider so that you can see how you're doing professionally, personally, and socially. Now, imagine with me for a moment, you have just walked into this room. Guys are seated down discussing about you. Now, in case you don't know, one day people will be seated down somewhere discussing about you. You'll be the agenda. You will be the item on the menu. Guys are seated down discussing about you, talking about the kind of a person you are. And these people are people that value you, they admire you, and they respect you. These are not people that are strangers to you. They are people that know you. What would you want them to say about you? Let me hear a few responses. What would you want the people who value you, respect you, and honor you to say about you? Let me hear a few responses. Just one word. One word that you would want somebody to say about you that you'd feel, hey, that word defines a person that has lived a high quality life. Anybody wants to engage in this? Yes, sir. Dependable. Do you think dependable is something good? Yeah, because every one of us wants to have somebody around them that they can depend on. They don't want somebody who is erratic and runs their life on autopilot. They want somebody who is dependable and intentional. Let me get a few more. Kind, right? So there is dependable, there is kind. Yes, who else? There was somebody somewhere there? Caring, all right. Anybody else on this other side? Just, all right. Somebody said strong. Now, have you realized something interesting about all the verbs that we want to describe our lives? There is nothing materialistic about them. All of them are qualities that are within your reach, and you don't need a higher position for you to cultivate them. You can actually start right now. By the way, it is not more positioning that gives you a greater quality of life. It is a greater quality of life that gives you better positioning in life. Are we together? Okay, if we are together, say I. I want us to make sure we are together. Haya, inua mkono, weka namna hii. Sema we are together. So tell your neighbor, it's about the internal life. Steve Covey, who happens to be a renowned researcher in the area of personal development, said that human beings are obsessed with cultivating what he called personality ethic instead of character ethic. Personality ethic is the external. It is the things that come out of who you are. But character ethic is a reduction of everything to who you are. And that's why I like what he said. He said dependable. That's character, right? Somebody else said kind. Somebody else said just. If you can work on the internal quality of life, then you have something that can never be taken away from you. Short story, I want to tell you. So I worked in the government for a good 16 years. So for these 16 years, I worked the government, I rose up the ranks, I became a manager, and I was put in charge of a department where we were trusted with a lot of resources. Now, I had a boss who was my senior, and because there was a lot of money coming in, and you know people say, pesa ya serikali ni ya serikali, sindio? Hata ukiiba utapelekwa mahali. So this gentleman decides to embezzle funds in the company. And so I was watching everything as it was going on, and so I decided, hey, this guy is embezzling funds. If something comes up and we are called to accountability, because I was in the department, I was going to be thrown under the bus. So do you know what I decided to do? I decided to have character ethic. So I went, made an appointment with the CEO, went and reported the fraud that was going on. Now, woe unto me, immediately I reported the fraud that was going on. 2 weeks after that report was handed over, I was given an interdiction letter. That's Kenya for you, right? Does that happen in the hospitality industry? Right? So I was given an interdiction letter, and I was told, hey, you are part of the guys who are co-perpetrators, embezzling funds. 2 weeks later, our names were on the front page of the People Daily. So and so and so and so and so and so are reported to be suspected embezzlers of government resources. You know, Kwanza, when they are reporting about you, they use very complicated English so that it can look like it's a real story, yeah? And I remember it happened that I was feeling, how can you report and then now you are sent packing? You are the first one to be thrown under the bus. Now, here is the thing that happened. Even as I left, and I had been, put on that spot and accused when I was the whistleblower, because I left with my internal quality intact, I could sleep like a baby. You know why? Martin Luther said that a clear conscience is the softest pillow. Tell your neighbor, a clear conscience is the softest pillow. It's called internal quality. All right? Now, let's look at a few things. So what are some of the things that, by the way, let me finish that story before I go on. So that's the first time I went to the DCI in Kiambu. Ushai kwenda polisi ukasweat. and it's cold and you're sweating. I went there. My old mother was so scared. She decided, kijana wangu ako karibu kufungwa, let me accompany him. At least let me see him for the first time before he is put behind bars. And I went there. The police interrogated me. And beside me, there was a guy from one of the banks in Kenya who had stolen 25 million. On the other side, there was another guy that had stolen several millions. And I was in the middle of two thieves. You know the way they say Jesus was between two thieves, yeah? And it happened that the reason why I had been interdicted is because part of the reason was in our department where we were 30 staff members, I was the only Kikuyu. And you know, if there is money somewhere, yeah, and then that money gets lost, and then you look at the tribes of the people, yeah. They call them ethnic extractions. You know, when you're a Luo, you don't say tribe. Tell your neighbor it's not tribe, it's called ethnic extraction. when you are somewhere and money gets lost and there's a Kikuyu there, who stole the money? That was my crime of being a Kikuyu. But luckily, because I think things were to work for me, I went through the process, and 6 months after, I was reinstated back, and I was appointed to become the integrity manager of that whole department. Because integrity may run slow, but it will always go far. Are we together? Now tell your neighbor, it's called internal quality. Hiya, let's look at some of the things that create internal bankruptcy before we are able to finish up on a few things. Let me just jump all that because I don't want to keep you for long. What are the vital signs? You know, when you go to visit a doctor, before they prescribe medicine for you, they take you to it's called triage. Triage, eh? I have new vocabulary now, triage. So they take you there and they check for your vital signs. They check for your temperature, they check for your heart rate, they check several things about you. Now, if you want to know whether you have a total quality life, there are several things that I want you to go and look at and reflect upon, right? By the way, what are some of the things you feel can make somebody to have a quality life internally? Before I go ahead and even talk about them. What are some of the things? Somebody that you say, hey, this person has internal quality. They may not have the external manifestations of that, but they have the internal. What are some of the things? Yes? What are some of the things? Anybody? They sleep well, right? In other words, they have a sense of tranquility. There is a sense of peace around them. Yeah? By the way, do you know it has been proven that if you get success, but you don't develop peace, your success will become the fastest accelerator for your destruction. When you lack peace, right? Because there is a sense in which when you are tranquil, you are consolidated on the inside, you are settled on the inside, you have peace of mind. I gave this story last time about a manager that I once worked with, and he was overseeing a lot of Gen Zs. By the way, interestingly, Gen Zs were part of his team, and they were sales team members. So this manager happened to be having an affair with a manager that was in just the floor beneath us. So one time we are in a sales meeting and the conversation is going on, and every other time we are seeing this manager is on WhatsApp. Kaa kidogo, anaenda kwa WhatsApp. Anakaa kidogo, anaenda kwa WhatsApp. And what was actually happening was that she was chatting with, you know, they talk about office romance, yeah? She was chatting with a colleague. And as they were chatting, they began to exchange pleasantries online, yeah? You know what it means to exchange pleasantries online, yeah? So it happened that this manager, in the process of exchanging pleasantries with the other colleague, she updated a pornographic video on the group platform, thinking that she's sending to the... You know, ushaisikia manager amepiga nduru kashindwa. Because we just have to say, and we are wondering, why is she screaming? And then she looked at her phone and she screamed again. And then, you know, young people being as curious as they are, they decided to check on the group, you know. Somebody just checked on the group and they showed the other colleague. Say, look at what the boss was chatting. This boss was almost approaching retirement, 55 years. She had some days of leave that were left. What do you think she did with those days of leave? Now, here is the worst part of the conversation. The lady that had actually uploaded that video was also an elder in some religious institution. You know why she had to take that quick tactical retreat? Let's call it a tactical retreat. It's because her peace had been disrupted. And here's the thing that I want us to appreciate, and you're going to see this as we go on. Anything that contaminates your integrity professionally will affect your stability in every other area of your life. Are we together? So ask your neighbor, what are you doing that can potentially destabilize your peace? Like that manager. Mulize, what are you doing that could force you to go and leave? And you know what happened? Even when she came back after the leave, she would just go to her office and sit on her desk, and her social life was seriously disrupted simply because of a decision that was against conscience, that robbed her of peace and compromised her social engagements. So, quickly, 4 things that will be indicators, if you like, of inner stability or inner quality of life. Number one, very quickly. 4 things that will determine your inner state of quality as an individual. Number one is what I call if you find that you have what is called a peculiarity bankruptcy. In other words, you live a life where you are not comfortable in your own skin. Have you ever seen people who, when somebody else gets promoted, they cannot sit on their seat properly? Now, just tell your neighbor, I hope you're not the one. I just hope you're not the one. Peculiarity bankruptcy. You lack such a sense of self-honor that the only other way you think you can make up for that deficit is by competing with others, comparing with others, or contending with others. By the way, when you lack a sense of peculiarity, you will either compete, contend, or compare. And if the worst comes to the worst, now you'll get to a place of compromising your values, because you don't have a sense of peculiarity. So if you're a lady and you see your colleague with stilettos and all those things, you go and, if she has a 1 inch, you go and buy her. Peculiarity. Have you ever realized that even your thumbprint is unique? There is nobody in the world that can replicate your own thumbprint. That's how unique you are. And let me tell you, one of the things that I've realized about people who live a life of quality is that they have a sense of owning their uniqueness. In fact, look at your neighbor and tell them, this is a good time to own your uniqueness. Just tell them, own your uniqueness. Own your uniqueness. Yeah? Here is what happens. When you own your uniqueness, you actually realize, now I am not a liability where I am. I am a resource. I once went for an interview when I was working for the government, and I went through all the ranks of the interview, and the gentleman told me, you have qualified in everything except that you have a background of working for the government. And people who work for the government, we don't trust them. Now, I had 2 options. I could have walked away from there, bashing myself, feeling sorry for myself, feeling like I have missed out on an opportunity. But you know what? Because I understand my peculiarity, I walked away saying, they have lost an opportunity to have a resource. Because when you have a sense of uniqueness, you realize you are a resource. Do you know one of the things, and I loved again the presentation on Gen Zs, one of the things about these guys, because they grew up under millennials, you know, you remember millennials or Gen Ys, when you are growing up, you are almost suffocated by your parents, right? Is that right? If you say, I want to go for a party, they tell you no. You say, you know, these guys that are Gen Zs have grown up in a space where they have been over-affirmed, so they are overconfident about their uniqueness. I was talking to a HR manager the other day that was telling me, a young Gen Z walked into the office and told them, the JD says I'm supposed to do 1, 2, 3. Why am I doing 3, 4, 5? So she told the manager, by the way, please review this and let's revisit the conversation on Monday. So she came to work on imagine telling a manager that. That would almost be an abomination in those earlier years, right? Ati unaambia manager aje, ati we revisit. So this young lady went for her, weekend, came back on Monday, smiling, bubbly, excited, came back and say, but hey boss, are there any changes? And then the boss said, we told you, your contract says you do this and any other duties that may be assigned as occasion demands, right? Do you know what happened with that young lady? The following, Monday amerudi kazini. Tuesday, she resigned on her WhatsApp. One sentence. One. It's called knowing your peculiarity, eh? Hawa watu wanajua peculiarity yao. I don't know whether you are privileged to attend. I attended, because I also happen to work with a bit of young people in mentoring. I attended some of the conversations on X. Men, these guys are brutal. They don't respect position. So if you're stuck on hierarchy, and hierarchy is what defines you, then they are not defined by hierarchy. So what am I saying? When peculiarity is understood, then you carry something that cannot be taken away from you, and you begin living a quality life. Are we together? But the sociologists will tell you that if you want to learn how to live a quality life, you must study what does every generation teach. So there is a lesson to be learned from every generation. So peculiarity bankruptcy. A lot of people lack a sense of quality because they have peculiarity bankruptcy. Number two, very quickly. Number two, very quickly, is what I call purpose bankruptcy. Here is something that you will realize as the world evolves. As the world evolves, society is going to be sculptured more around purpose and less around roles. Let me say that again. As society evolves, society is going to be defined more by purpose and not roles. Now, have you realized that a lot of people, when they lose a job, I have a gentleman, interestingly, who was working in one of the hotels in Diani here. During COVID, the gentleman lost his job because, of course, there were no clients. So it was either we cut on staff costs or we close down. So the guy he lost his job. Do you know what happened? The moment that guy lost his job, because he did not have a sense of purpose that is bigger than his JD, he sank into depression. He is married. He has 3 children. His job became waking up, preparing the children, taking them to the bus stop, and then watching movies the whole day. We are talking about a 40-something-year-old person. That's what a sense of purpose, when it lacks, that is what it does to you. Now ask your neighbor, who are you without your job? Just ask them, who are you without your job? Muulize, who are you without a job? If your only identity is what you do, you don't know who you are. Are we together? Haya, angalia jirani yako, mwambie retirement itafika siku moja. Si wewe ni wale wako retire. Mwambie itafika. In fact, I don't know whether they do this anymore because I left employment a while back. You know, when I was employed, I remember when you would receive your pay slip, every month, the pay slip had the date of your retirement. Now, if you don't have a sense of purpose that makes your role bigger than your job, then you lack internal quality. And here is something that I want you to appreciate. When you begin to have a sense of purpose and know the diversity of who you are as an individual, even when you lose your job, you can quickly reinvent yourself to do something else. Because you know that what you do is not who you are, but who you are can propel what you do. Are we together? Haya, angalia jirani yako ambia retirement inakuja tafadhali. You better have a higher reason than yeah. Purpose bankruptcy. Purpose bankruptcy. By the way, one of the things that you will realize that is happening, and by the I'm picking back also on what was shared earlier. One of the things that you will realize that is happening again with the evolution of generations, that's why you heard about career multitasking. Because the levels of awareness are increasing and people are realizing I don't have to be stuck on one track. I am a multifaceted human being. So the world is moving away from a salary model to a model of multiple sources of income. Are we together? So if you're together, say I. Now, in fact, tell anybody, you need to evolve with the times, yeah? I tell them, you need to evolve with the times. So we have talked about peculiarity bankruptcy. We've talked about purpose bankruptcy. These are signs that you're not doing well in terms of living a total quality life. Number 3 is what we've talked about, the bankruptcy of peace. That you are dominated by negative energy. That when somebody ruffles you in the office, you struggle to work because every time you see them, your heart rate is interrupted. Are we together? I once worked with a manager, and we used to do what are called, what were those things called? Review something. There's a name they have for it. What is it called? PDPs, yeah? Performance contracts, yeah? So anytime the end of the period to review was coming, there was no peace in the office. Because everybody was feeling, hey, what if I'm rated this way or I'm rated that way? And one of the things that happens is that when you begin to allow your internal world to be dominated by negative energy, because you lack emotional intelligence, because you lack emotional resilience, because you lack emotional awareness, you will end up losing your peace very easily. Now, there's something I want us to appreciate. For as long as you work with people, there will be opportunities to lose your peace, right? Ayangalia jirani yako mwambie, being offended is inevitable. Just tell them, it's inevitable. But being negative is optional. Peace bankruptcy. There is nothing, and especially because I know I am addressing you guys and you guys are leaders in different spaces, there is nothing as difficult as following a leader that does not have the centeredness it needs to be a peaceful leader. There's nothing as difficult as that. In fact, if you are the kind of person that has negative energy, people avoid you, right? But if you are somebody who has positive energy, peaceful vibes, people gravitate towards you. The secret to loyalty is creating an environment of peace when people gravitate towards you. Are we together? Do you know why some of us are afraid of going to our homes? We want the conference to stay a bit longer. Do you know why? Because some of us, we know our homes are volatile. There is no peace. So when you came to Mombasa, Kwanza, you came here and you looked at the ocean, and all of a sudden your internal equilibrium was restored to factory settings. And then now Saturday is close by. And then now you're thinking, man, am I about to go back there? You know, if you study the top 5 most poor countries in the world, and the top 5 most prosperous countries in the world, which apparently happen to be Nordic countries, you will find the difference between them is the state of how people relate with each other. If your social fabric is broken, it will reflect in the state of your pockets. Can I just leave that there? So that it sings. So tell your neighbor, learn to be a peacemaker. Yeah. Learn to deal with negative emotions quickly. And this is a whole lesson that we could discuss. Learn to deal with violated expectations quickly. Because one of the things you will realize as you deal with people, the more you manage your expectations, the more you conserve positive energy. Are we together? So this is called peace bankruptcy. Number 4, and the last one, and then I give you just some few things here that I think are important. By the way, what's the time? I don't want to exceed my time. I have how many minutes to go? 7 to finish, yeah? All right, I'll finish in the 7 minutes. This is a presentation that I do over a whole day, but I'll try and do it in the small time that is left. So there is what is called perspective bankruptcy. The inability to frame how you interpret events so that you can remain with an internal locus of control. Let me give you a short story to show you how this works. I read the story of a guy that was running a very big printing firm that was worth millions of dollars. One time, a fire came and the whole industry burnt down. He was down to zero. What would be your emotion if you are the owner of that company? Or maybe you are running a furniture company and somebody walks there with a cigarette, drops it there, fire begins, everything comes down. What would be your emotion? Angry, perhaps? Frustrated, perhaps? You know what this guy did? He went and he called his wife. And he told his wife, come, let's see all our mistakes burning down. Now we have an opportunity to redo all that work without mistakes. What was the difference between that man and the man that would be frustrated? They were able to reframe the event in a way that empowers them to be in charge. Are we together? So would you tell your neighbor, it's not what happens to you, it is what happens in you. Just tell the other neighbor. That one did not hear. Tell the other neighbor, it is not what happens to you. It is what happens in you. It is an internal state. How do you interpret events? How do you give meaning to what happens to you? How do you give meaning to when there is no business? Do you know it's been proven that businesses that have resilience may not necessarily have more resources than others? They only have a leader that has perspective. Same thing with every other thing. Your ability to interpret and reframe things in a way that gives you control. Are we together? Now, how do you interpret things? It has been said that the mind of a human being is predominantly cultured to interpret things in a negative way. So, for example, for those of you that have children, any people here who have children? Maybe who are teenagers? Anybody who is a teenager? Or a young adult? Yeah? So, what happens when they tell you they've gone somewhere and then they are going to be back at 7 and then it is 7:30 and they've not come? What happens to you? You already begin imagining the worst, right? What if something has happened to them? What if they are doing something wrong? Because you have been cultured and conditioned to interpret things in a wrong way. The greatest task in building inner quality is learning to reframe things in a way that works for you, not that works against you. Okay, if we're together, say I. Hayangalia jirani yako mwambie reframe. Mwambie tena reframe. Yeah. If you're working with a difficult boss, reframe. Reframe how you interpret things. If you're finding that business is difficult, just reframe. Steve Covey says that we see things not as they are, but based on the paradigm in our minds. That's total quality living. Okay? Perspective. And then the last one is what I call progress bankruptcy. These are indicators that your life is lacking internal quality. You know, living long is not the same as living well. Is that true or true? Have you ever seen somebody that has lived long, but they have lived a bitter, cynical, negative life? Everybody avoids them. And then you can find somebody that is younger, that is bubbly, energetic. What's the difference between those two people? You see, living long is a result of the passage of time. Living well is as a result of application of strategy. Are we together? Tuko pamoja? Haya, siangalie jirani yako ambie be progressive, be progressive. Be progressive. And I think the presentation we had earlier, especially on managing Gen Zs, is a call to us to be progressive in our thinking. Stubbornness cannot secure the future. It takes flexibility to secure the future. Are we together? Some of us are too stubborn for life to have quality. Sini ukweli? Too stubborn. There is no bone in you that can bend. All of them, when they try to bend, they break. Because you are lacking the energy to understand that you need to sculpture a mind that can evolve. A wise man says the future belongs to the man that can learn, unlearn, and relearn. That's what progress is about. There will always be things you need to learn. There will always be things you need to unlearn. And there will always be things you need to relearn. The problem with some of us is that we stopped learning. And when you stop learning, you are old. Whether you are 40 or you are 60, you are old. Age is not time determined. It is mindset determined. All right? So let's finish with a few thoughts here. Allow me to jump a lot of my presentation so that I finish. And then we see how this wraps up. So, allow me to give you, before I share this, just a quick 1-minute bite on 4 things that show that you are beginning to live a quality life. 4 things that show that you're beginning to live a quality life. Number 1, and these are not even on the presentation, they are just something that I feel I want to share with you. Number 1, your level of resourcefulness increases. In other words, you are able to marshal your energies more productively and more resourcefully. The moment you become resourceful internally, the quality of your life naturally goes up. Have you ever realized the problem, for example, with Africa is never lack of resources? Is that true or true? Do you know Africa has every resource that is needed to become a first world continent, right? But what's the problem with Africa then if it's not resources? Is it corruption? Yes, that could be one of it. What could be the other challenge? Management is poor, right? Are we together? We were told by the former president that Kenya, 2 billion shillings is lost every. What would happen if those 2 billion shillings were managed prudently? You know what would happen? The country would not even need to take debts, perhaps. Right? So what's the problem? The problem is not availability of resources. The problem is development of resourcefulness. Now, as a leader, as a manager, as an individual, when you develop resourcefulness, everything about your professional life, personal life, and social life improves. Let me give you a very practical example. Have you ever realized when you have a problem, there is somebody perhaps in your mind, you know, if I call them, they may give me a solution or an idea. Do you know somebody like that? Do you find yourself gravitating towards them when you have a challenge? Do you know why you gravitate towards them? You gravitate towards them because they have resourcefulness. Resourcefulness. The first building block of social capital is resourcefulness. Are we together? Number 2, not only resourcefulness, number 2 thing that shows that the quality of your life is growing is relevance. What is relevance? Relevance is the ability to use your mind innovatively to create ways that produce progressive outcomes. Relevance. By the way, it's not age that makes people irrelevant, right? Sinikweli. Is it age that makes people irrelevant? No. It is the inability to think futuristically that makes people irrelevant. Number 3, very quickly, signs of a quality life. So number 1 is, we've talked about what? Resourcefulness. Number 2 is what? Relevance. Number 3 is risk-taking ability. Risk-taking ability. Tony Campolo, who happens to be one of the most successful sociologists, did a research and he discovered, he talked to men that were, in fact, this was a group of people he talked to that were 80 years and above. And he asked them, what are your greatest regrets in life? Do you know what were their greatest regrets in life? Most people don't regret because of risks they took. Most people regret because of risks they did not take. Sinikweli. Do you have somebody here that perhaps one time you were talking with somebody and then they told you about an opportunity somewhere and then you avoided the risk and then they took the risk and then you saw the result and then you say, I wish I'd just taken the risk. The risks you avoid determine the regrets you will experience. That's why when you become a quality person on the inside, you become a strategic risk taker. Okay? So number 1 is what? Resourcefulness. Number 2 is what? Relevance. Number 3 is what? Risk-taking ability. And the last one is resilience. Resilience. The ability to manage your mind in a way that can withstand challenges. Managing the mind. Abraham Lincoln was one of the presidents that led the United States of America in one of the toughest times in history. Do you know the one thing that Abraham Lincoln had that most presidents did not have? Resilience. The ability to use the mind to navigate and plow through a difficult challenge. Resilience. Those are the things that point to whether you have a high quality internal life. All right? So can we finish by giving you 4 things you must do for you to have internal quality? 4 things, very quickly, very simple things. These ones are not rocket science. These are things that are reachable, they are available for every one of us, and guess what? When you begin to appropriate them in your life, you will actually find that the quality of your life will go up. Number 1 is what I call the pursuit of genuineness. The pursuit of genuineness. Being a genuine person. And I like something our brother at the back there said, that he wants to be dependable. Is it possible to be dependable when you're not genuine? It's not. So many years ago, I was working in a place where in the morning you would be given cash to start your day because it was sort of like a retail business. And I remember this particular time, the guy who was supposed to be giving us the money was to give me 100,000 shillings, right? And those days, we didn't even have 1,000 shillings note. We only had the 500 shillings note. So the guy arranged the notes, but for every bunch of 10,000 shillings, he would remove a 500 shillings note. So by the time he gave me the money, how much was it? 95,000. Instead of being 100,000. Now let me tell you what happened. We worked under very difficult circumstances in that office because working with somebody who is not genuine is like having a broken tooth. Have you ever tried to eat with a broken tooth? Unasikianga vile unatafuna chakula haraka haraka unameza. Involuntary accelerated chewing, eh? Genuineness. When you become genuine, it means your motives are pure. It means that your intentions are for the good of the people that are around you. You work on your intentions, and when you work on your intentions intentionally, you become exceptional. Genuineness. Number 2, very quickly, not only must you be genuine, you must do what is called personal growth. We're talking about personal growth, right? Growth. In other words, at any one time in your life, you must not only be a genuine person, You must always be asking, how can I become better? That is what growth is all about. Let me tell you, in the journey of social engagements, professional engagements, personal engagements, there is no end to growth. Somebody said, the saddest eulogy that can ever be written about you is they lived up to 40, but they died at 70. Because for the rest of those years, they never invested in their growth. Are we together? Genuineness, growth, investing in your growth. By the way, we talked about resourcefulness. You cannot be resourceful if you're not growing. Are we together? So, growing people become resourceful people become relevant people become on-demand people. Two last things and then we finish. Genuine, growing. Number 3, generous. Generous. This is about quality, yeah? Quality of inner life. Generosity. Why is this important? If you study history, the people that have left the richest legacies were the most selfless. Is that true? The people that have left the largest footprint of impact were not people who had money necessarily. The other day, the CEO of Mombasa Cement passed on, right? What's the one thing you had people saying about him? Generous, right? There was no person that was crying that a CEO had died. But there was a person that was saying, we've lost a quality person because we are now burying generosity. Generosity is powerful. Wherever you find yourself in life, socially, professionally, or personally, never consume more than you contribute. That's a law of quality living. Never take more than you give. Generosity. This is quality. And here is something that happens when you become generous. And I've realized, by the way, and again, let me just go back to the story of Gen Zs. I have a friend of mine, he's called Lawrence Magambo, amazing gentleman. So he leads a team where he works that is composed of millennials and Gen Zs, interestingly. One of his biggest wins with those young people is that every month he has a pizza party for them at his expense. So he tells them, hey, this month, where are we going? Pick a location. I had somebody saying to Oneshe Pin, wake up in. The guys go, they take pizza, and he just has conversations with them that are not even related to work. So when the guy comes back to the office, because of his generosity, he has qualified for their loyalty. Are we together? So ask your neighbor, how much is pizza? Can you buy pizza? I'm giving you a strategy for Gen Zs, yeah? That's besides the point. The point is, in any space, the most generous person wins. And don't be generous so that you can get reciprocity. Be generous because you are a quality person. Right? Because if you expect reciprocity, you may be disappointed. But if you do it because that's who you are, you are not a human doing, you are a human being. You know that generosity is part of your culture. You will go very far and you'll be a high quality person. Lastly, the last one is, if you're going to be a high quality person, total quality person that makes professional mobility, personal mobility, and social mobility, you must cultivate the ability to be grateful. There's a good book I want every one of you to go and read, for those of you that read, yeah? It's called Leading with Gratitude. It's a research that was done about a guy that studied 1,300 managers and studied managers that had created a culture of gratitude in their workspace. He realized that there's a direct correlation between gratitude and productivity. The moment you train yourself that I will not be entitled, I will live with a culture of appreciation, you will live a quality life. Let me wrap up my presentation with this quote. Again, I've jumped a lot. This is a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of the greatest philosophers in history. Here is what he says about life, and quality life, if you like. He says, the purpose of life is not to be happy. It is to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, and to have it make some difference that someday somebody will remember that you lived. And not only did you live, but you lived well. Because you did not just focus on a quantity life, but you focused on a quality life. My challenge for you as I sit down is don't settle for mediocrity. Don't settle for survival. Don't settle for something that is beneath who you can potentially be. Somebody said if you're going to be exceptional, when everybody else sits down, you stand up. When everybody else stands up, you stand out. When everybody else stands out, you become outstanding. And when everybody else becomes outstanding, you become the standard. Because that's the quality you set for yourself. Thank you very much. Yes, sir. You wanted me to repeat something? All right. So when everybody else around you sits down, you stand up. When everybody around you stands up, you stand out. When everybody around you stands out, you become outstanding. And when everybody around you becomes outstanding, you become the standard. Because you have set a standard for yourself to be an exceptional human being. Thank you very much. Is there any question? I've exceeded my time. I'm sorry. But if there's any question, I can answer before we sit down. But thank you very much for your time. Any question? I think there is none, right? Thank you very much.